Hello everyone, my name is Elise. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing my September wrap up. Yes, that's right. I had to remember the month for a second. So I'm very excited to do my September wrap up. I have 11 books here that I'm going to be talking about today. So we will go ahead and dive in because I'm going to try and not make this super long. We'll see how it goes. Like always, I'm going to go in the order that I read them throughout the month, not necessarily the order that I liked them the best or anything like that. So the first book that I read this month was To Be Taught If Fortunate by Becky Chambers, and I had put 2 Becky Chambers books on my TBR, hoping that I would read one of them because I have 4 of their books and haven't read any. I have the first 3 in the Wayfarers series, and decided to start with this novella, which is a standalone novella, before I got into the series, just to make sure I liked their writing. And I very much enjoyed this. So this, I would say, is like a 4.5 star, super close to a 5 star. I've debated whether or not I should give it a 5 star, but I loved this. So this is a sci-fi novel, and this is about 4 astronauts who go into space in sort of a like publicly funded space expedition, and this takes place slightly in the future, and they have on their agenda to visit 4 different planets to not only explore the planets but also to assess whether or not they might be inhabitable in the future. This follows them and their relationships, and it was so enjoyable to get to visit all of the planets. The world building that she did on each planet was amazing. I very much enjoyed it, felt fully immersed in all the description. A lot of people have said Becky Chambers is like a cozier sci-fi author, and I definitely agree with that. There were aspects of this that felt very cozy, and the tone of it was still like uplifting throughout the entire thing, even when there were difficult things happening. So I really appreciated that as well, because sometimes like books in space can be like very dramatic, very like ghastly, all that type of stuff. And this had an uplifting tone throughout. Another thing that I really loved about this, probably my favorite thing about this book, is it really addresses the question of like, what are the ethics of space travel, not just as a whole, but as an astronaut? Like, what are the ethical implications of being someone on another planet that basically you are disrupting the life there in some way? And how do you go about that in a way that is just? This did a really good job of exploring that, and I think it talked about the ethics of that in a way that felt very realistic, like some questions that we should be considering ourselves. And then it also had, you know, some twists at the end as well. So overall, amazing book. I highly recommend this, and I will be picking up more Becky Chambers in my future. So I'm very excited that I have other things by them. The next book that I read is Welcome to Midland, and this is by, I'm already doing it. I'm forgetting to say the publisher. Okay, so the publisher of this is Hodor, and the publisher of this is Deep Vellum, and this is by Genderqueer. And Deep Vellum is an indie publisher in Texas, and this was gifted to me by one of my friends, Kat, so thank you, Kat. And I really enjoyed this as well. I was a little bit nervous. This is broken down into 4 sections, I believe, 3 or 4. Let me just double check. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, broken down into 4 sections. This I also gave 4 stars. I very much enjoyed it. The first section was the only part that I didn't absolutely love. I felt like sections 2 and 3 were very, very strong, like 5-star worthy material. This is all about kind of Logan's experience growing up and having kind of questions about their sexuality. There is some trigger warnings in this for suicidal ideation, so be aware of that going in. There is also another trigger warning for like abuse, so there's some abusive relationships happening in here. So definitely look up the trigger warnings before going into this. But yeah, I think that they did such a great job. I think this is a perfect book of poetry for people who say they don't like poetry because they feel like they don't understand it. These are very straightforward poems. There's not like a ton of like metaphor or like hidden meaning, or when there are those things, it's pretty obvious what they're talking about. And I don't think that's a detriment to the writing. I think that's just a different style, but I think this is a much more accessible style to get into if you're interested in poetry. So highly recommend this. It's very short, so it's also quick to get through. And I'm realizing I have my dog's hair up at the top, which is going to happen a lot. So yeah, that is Welcome to Midland. Also recommend that. The next one was the first book I read for a vlog that has come out already. So I will link that vlog down below. And that vlog was reading some of my 5-star predictions. And the first one I read was You Made a Fool of Death with Your Beauty by Akwaeke Emezi. And this is a romance. This has been buzzy. Lots of people have read this, so maybe you've heard about it. But this is a romance that sort of defies a lot of the tropes from the romance genre, and that's not a knock on those. I love a traditional genre romance, but this really strays away from all of that, and I think it makes it unique and it makes it very exciting to read. It's very plotty, so it's very fast-paced, and you really don't know who they are going to end up with at the end. And I think that's part of the intrigue of this book, is there are a host of love interests and you really aren't sure who the main character Faye is going to end up with. This ultimately didn't make a 5-star for me. It was a 4-star. I still very much enjoyed it, but I had a few issues with some of the subject matter in the book. Mainly like one scene that I feel is like borderline abusive that really wasn't written as if it was abusive, and it was written as if we should just go along with it and think it's okay. So didn't love that. And then ultimately some of the steam just didn't work for me in the way that it usually does for a romance, and I can't quite point my finger to why, but I think part of it might actually be that the scenes were pretty thinky, and it just wasn't something that worked really well for me in a sex scene. So that is this book. Loved it. Great food writing. It's very summery. So if you're trying to get in like one last book from the summer or anything like that, this is a great option. And the writing is spectacular per usual with this author. So that is this one. And this one is by Atria. All right, next one, I think, yes, is Dead Souls by Sam Riviere. And this is published by Catapult. So this is also in a video that I will link down below. And this is in a video about Catapult, the publisher. So I read 3 books by them. This one did not work for me. It did not work for me. I will be unhauling this. This is written in almost like a stream of consciousness style. So every page looks like this. There's no paragraph breaks. The sentences are extremely long run-on sentences, most of the time lasting over a page. And that isn't inherently bad for me, but I just don't think the execution worked in this novel. So this novel is somewhat in the future. It is satirical. It's talking about the publishing industry, and it follows a main character who is an editor at a literary magazine. And in this future, there has been a program created to stop plagiarism, and beyond just like blatant plagiarism, to stop any like redundant thought or thinking in the literature that's coming out. So not only do like the words have to be different, but they're wanting like different ideas, themes, all that type of stuff. So basically wanting like true original thought. This new program can determine that. So everything gets fed into the program and it tells you the score. And you have to get at least like a 96% or above in order to be published. So there is this famous author who gets put through the system and they don't meet the correct score. So it's kind of like a scandal, and they have a fall from grace. And then the main character of this meets them at a bar and is sort of getting their story told back to them. This has a lot of interesting stuff in it, like the idea of what is original thought, like can that even be done? some of the issues in the publishing industry today, and that I appreciated the book for, but it was so long and so repetitive, and I know that that was intentional, and it just didn't work for this book. I don't think, like, it wasn't engaging, it wasn't thought-provoking, it wasn't doing anything extra to the story other than being on the nose of like, see what I'm doing here, I'm doing the same thing I'm talking about is being done, and it just didn't work for me at all. So not for me. I do think that if you liked 100 Years of Solitude, you might like this. I also didn't like 100 Years of Solitude, and there are some similarities in these two books. I do think 100 Years of Solitude is better, but this could work for you if you really liked that book. So that is Dead Souls. The next one is a library book, and that is CQ, and the tagline is A Journey Through American Loneliness, and this is by Kristen Radtke, and this is a graphic nonfiction, maybe I would consider it, about loneliness. That's the art style. And this was really good. I think that this is full of lots of like research, and you can tell that they were very thoughtful about this. It has an interesting take on loneliness and sort of like the necessity or inevitability of loneliness, but also some of the concerns around loneliness and like health implications. And it does it in an interesting way where each section, it looks at loneliness through a different lens. So like, for example, one lens could be around, you know, like movies and like how we see loneliness in movies. And another one could be like radio. How do we see it in radio? So it takes different topics and looks at them through that lens. I very much enjoyed it. Highly recommend it if you're interested in this topic. And yeah, I do think this is good for everyone because everyone experiences loneliness at one time or another. It's a very universal feeling. So yeah, I thought this was great, and great coming out of the pandemic too, when like loneliness maybe was at an all-time high. So that is CQ. Oh my gosh, and I should say I'm already doing it with the publisher. I'm not saying them. My goodness, this is by Pantheon Books. So that is that one. The next one I read from the library, and I read via audio, and it was also for that 5-star predictions vlog. And that is, what is it called? We Had to Remove This Post. That is by Hanna Bervoets, and it's translated by Emma Rault from the Danish. And this one was 5 stars, so it was a winner for me. This one is following a group of content moderators that work for a Facebook-esque company. And they're tasked with viewing all of what might be explicit content and deciding whether or not it should stay up. I think that this did exactly what I wanted this book to do. It followed, you know, the consequences of viewing that type of content on a daily basis and the effects that that might have on a person. And because it follows a group, there is a main character, but it's also following like a group that she starts at the company with. And it shows all the different ways that someone might react, right? So there's a wide array of responses, and I really appreciated getting that because there would be a wide array of responses. That was really cool to see, and I think it also addressed not just like the things you might imagine would happen when you're viewing violence every day, but also the way in which it desensitizes you in a sense of like, if you're having to look at it through the lens of, does it meet these parameters, right? And that's what determines if it's up or not. And those parameters are flawed, right? So they would come up with scenarios in their real life and say like, oh, if this happened, would you leave it up or take it down? And they'd say, well, like it meets this, this, and this, but not this, of like, well, it's violent, but it's not violent intent, so we could leave it up. Or it's violent and it is violent intent, but it's newsworthy, so we're gonna leave it up. So all these decisions that they're told to make by the company and how that starts to blend into their real life. I also appreciated how it delved into what happens when you view content that is false on a regular basis. And it talks a little bit about like flat earthers, Holocaust deniers, all that type of stuff, and how that misinformation can get perpetuated and how it can be believed. So I thought that was all really intriguing. I'm raving about it. It's so good. I very much think that everyone should read it. It's short, and I think it has a lot of like philosophical questions that are coming up in our current time that we should be thinking about. So loved it. 5 stars. Absolutely recommend it. It's so, so good. The next book is Mrs. Caliban, and this is by Rachel Ingalls, and this edition is the Faber edition. I specifically ordered this one because I hate the cover, the original cover for this. This one I also very much enjoyed. It was a great reading month. I enjoyed like everything that I read. So this one follows Mrs. Caliban. So this was first published in the 80s, 1982, I want to say. Yes, 1982. And this follows a housewife who is unhappy in her marriage and in her life in general, as you know, lots of women were in those days. She hears on the radio that there has been an amphibious type man that has escaped from a research facility, and he's highly dangerous and on the loose and should be reported if found. And this person shows up to her house and she decides to help him stow away, basically. And then they have an ensuing romance together. This has a lot to do with like women's sexuality and sexual pleasure, and opening up the ideas of what that might be like. So very controversial at the time for that. It also has a lot to do with potentially mental illness and what implications that might have, and what happens to you when the mundanity of life is just taking over and crushing and soul destroying, and how that might impact you. So this was very good. It's also very short. It is a really good classic. Like if you're looking for a modern classic to read, I think this is a great one to do it. It's very fast paced, very intriguing, and I enjoyed it overall. So that is Mrs. Caliban. The next one I picked up and read for Banned Books Week, and that is Genderqueer, and this is by Maia, Kobabe, and this is a graphic memoir. And I picked this one up because the ALA, or the American Library Association, has this listed as one of the most banned books of the last year. So I decided that this one would be a good one to pick up for that. Here is a little sample of the art style. And this is by Oni Press, who is a great kind of graphic book press if you're interested in that. So this one, like I said, is a memoir. So it follows their experience of figuring out their gender identity and their sexuality, and kind of all of the implications that has and the ramifications it has on their life. So it follows, you know, reactions from family, it follows them throughout school and kind of into more of a present time period when they're a working professional, and all of the experiences in between. It is really good. It's really informative, and I think just a really great book to read, particularly for Banned Books Week, because we need more literature like this, especially in schools, for, you know, people who are looking for other experiences that represent them. So this was very good. Highly recommend it for everyone. And the next one we have is A Beefy Boy, and that is Crossroads by Jonathan Franzen. And this is published by FSG. And yeah, big boy. I overall really enjoyed this. I gave this 4 stars. This is about the Hildebrandt family. So it follows all of their POVs. Well, I guess all but the youngest POV. And so it's following a mother, a father, and the 3 eldest children. One being the oldest boy, then a girl, then a boy, and then the youngest boy we don't get a POV from, but he features in others' POVs. This one, the father is a pastor, and they're growing up in like a very evangelical Christian household and community, and it follows kind of the implications of faith on all of them. It Crossroads references a youth group that is very, I would say, like Young Life-esque, if anyone's familiar with that in the US. And that kind of features in a lot of the stories, this youth group. Things I really liked about this were the discussions around faith. I think they did a very nuanced take on it of like the good and the bad that comes with that. I do think that there were two POVs in here that really stood out to me as the most interesting, and the others weren't as good. And that's sort of like the two that were great, and then it's kind of a critique that the other ones weren't as good. So I think the mother, Marion, and one of the sons, Perry, are the standout POVs in this book, and they're the ones that have stayed with me, and they have the best voice, in my opinion. And then the other ones, like the father is just an idiot. Like he is a straight up joke of a man, like so dumb. I don't even understand. I know that's intentional, that he is supposed to be like farcical in some way, but it was so annoying because I'm like, man, he's real and like what a joke. But yeah, I think if you're interested in kind of conversations around faith and religion, and this also has some discussions on mental illness and how that can be passed down through the generations and the effect that might have on each of them. There's also, you know, talks about what it's like to be in a marriage long term, you know, a marriage that's struggling, and then also what it's like to feel like the black sheep in a family and feel like you don't belong. So all those things are coming up in here. The writing is great. I did really love the writing. This is the start of a trilogy and I will be continuing. But yeah, there were just a few things that I found a little bit lacking in some of the POVs that I didn't love, but that is Crossroads. Next one is the second book in a series, and that is A Perilous Undertaking by Deanna Raybourn, and this is the second book in the Veronica Speedwell series. And this is published, I want to say by Berkeley. This is published by Berkeley. And this was so good. It's so good. I loved the first one. I loved this one. I loved it so much that I'm gonna push reading the third one in October, even though it wasn't on my TBR, but I'm gonna find a way to read it. This follows Veronica Speedwell and Stoker, and they are like a buddy duo that solve murder mysteries together. So they're at it again, solving another murder mystery. He's kind of like grumpy, brusque, big, burly, and she is highly intelligent, is trying to kind of shake a lot of the gender norms of the time. This takes place, it's a period piece. I think it takes place in the 1800s in England. And it's just fantastic. It's very Sherlock Holmes-esque. If you like Sherlock Holmes, I think you will very much enjoy this. And there's, I believe, like 7 out already or something like that. So lots to devour if you end up loving it. So that is A Perilous Undertaking. And lastly, the book I read was the last book for that 5-star predictions vlog, and that is Julia and the Shark. And this is by Kiran Milwood Hargrave, and her husband Tom DeFreston does the illustrations, and this is published by Orion. This book is beautiful. I'll just start out by saying, let me show you one of the illustrations. So there's like a map, and then there's also these like see-through pages that have illustrations on them, so they can cover and show things on the actual illustrations themselves. It's beautiful. It's really well done. This is about a young girl, I think she's 9 or 10, whose family goes and moves on a lighthouse for a given summer because her father's going to be working there. Her mother is a marine biologist and will also be doing some research while she's out there. She very much loves her mother, and her mother is trying to find the Greenland shark, which is the oldest shark, trying to kind of get some research done about some medical implications that the shark might have. You know from the very beginning that her mother is ill in some way. You don't know in what way she is ill, and you don't know how that's going to play out. And it's about the main character, Julia, trying to deal with her mother's illness and some of the grief that comes with that, and also just trying to make friends and find her way in the world. So it's very heartwarming. I think it does a great job representing the illness that it represents in here, which I won't say because I don't want to give it away. But yeah, I think handled with a lot of care, and I think that this is something that a lot of people will just enjoy reading, whether you're a child or an adult. It's very much a good time. So highly recommend that one as well. And that is the end of this wrap-up video. It's longer than I wanted it to be. You know, we tried, but I hope you will read some of these. Like I said, I enjoyed everything in this list. I don't think I gave anything, well, okay, with the exception of one. With the exception of Dead Souls, everything was a 4 or a 5 star, which is crazy. So it was a very good reading month. I hope you enjoy. Please let me know what you read in the month of September and what you loved reading. I very much want to hear. So I will see you in the next one. Bye.